Okay guys, so today we're going to be working on this fox, and it's supposed to be laying in some foliage. Here is my sample, just so you guys can see. It's going to be really cute. This is going to be a 2-day lesson, and we're going to work on some drawing skills and some watercolor skills. So if you look on your paper, you have this part of the fox, which is like the head and then the tail. And the reason that we've given you these two pieces is not that you could not draw them, it's just to help you get them the right size and in the right place. And that's called proportion. Proportion is when things are in the right size and in the right place. Like if you're drawing a face, if you get the nose way too big or one eye really big and one eye really small, then you can tell that, and that's something that your brain does automatically. So it just helps you get everything in the right place. So what we're going to do first is draw our fox in pencil. So go ahead and get your pencil ready, or you may already have it. All right, so we're going to start with the fox's head. In the picture, I think on the flyer, the ears were out to the side, and I think that looks really good. Okay, so we're going to draw the ears out here. I'm going to do kind of a rounded triangle, and you don't want it to be up here in the middle. We're going to put them out here on the edge of our face shape. So I'm going to do another one here. Now again, when we're talking about proportion, we want them to be about the right size. Okay, if one's a little bit too small and one's a little bit too big, that's not a problem. If you have one that's like really tiny and one that's huge, then that is a problem. But as long as they're close, that's fine. And then in the one on the flyer, it had like a white inside like this, where it just came to the inside. You can draw those for sure with a triangle right in the middle, or I'm going to draw them like this, just to give you a different idea. And so this is like the outside of the ear, and this is the inside, so that it looks a little bit more 3D and rounded and less flat. All right, now I'm going to draw the nose. The nose is just going to be right down here at the end of the snout, and we're going to fill that in with Sharpie when we get there. Okay. Probably one of the hardest parts about drawing the fox is drawing the little fuzzy cheeks, and they're so cute. If you try to do it all in one piece, it makes it harder. A lot of times people think artists just do everything all at once. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw these 3 kind of triangle pieces, and see how I just kind of sketched them. And then I'm going to take a break, then I'm going to come back and connect this piece to the nose. All right, so I didn't just go boop, 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 right? I did it more slowly. So now, and I have to turn my paper, but now I'm going to come to the other side, and I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and if you break it up into these little pieces, it makes it a little bit easier to get it right. Now, my fox is sleeping. It's supposed to look like it's sleeping in some foliage, but if you want your fox to be awake, it can be. But the eyes go in the white cheek area. They don't go in the orange part of the face. Okay, so I have a sleeping fox. Well, actually, it looks like it's smiling. I think a sleeping fox would be the other way. Either way, its eyes are closed, so I'm okay. All right, now we're going to draw the back side of the fox. Okay, and just like with these, we don't want to do it all in one quick motion. All right, you want to kind of take your time and angle it. So I'm going to start right here where the ear is, and I'm going to start with a little curve like this. I know it needs to come down to here, but I can't really see what I'm doing, right? So I'm going to do that part, and then I'm going to kind of flip it, and I'm going to connect them right here. You see I'm just kind of sketching it at first, really lightly, and that's going to help me get that curve right. All right, that way you don't end up with like a weird triangle or something. Okay. There's really not many steps to drawing the fox, so we're going to do the cute little paw next. It kind of comes out at this curve like this. See how it's curving kind of downwards? You don't want to curve it in like a smile. You want a almost like a slight frown. If you make it smile, it's going to look like his paw is like dented or something. And then you're going to round it at the ends and bring it back. All right. And then we just have the little white tip. And instead of doing a straight line, just like how we did these, we're gonna make them a little bit pointed. All right, and there's our fox. Now the next step is to trace it in Sharpie. So I'm gonna do that while you guys are doing it. Is done. All right, guys, the next thing we're gonna do is paint our fox. So you need a water cup. My water is already dirty because I've been using it for something else. And then your paint set is gonna look like this. All right, we've got all of these colors. These are really good watercolor paints. And this is really good watercolor paper. A lot of times your teachers at school or maybe even your families, like we don't buy the really nice watercolor paper. So this is artist grade watercolor paper, and you should be able to touch it and feel that it's different than normal paper. It's got a bit of a texture to it, and the way that it handles watercolor is totally different. So the first thing we're gonna do is paint our fox. If you'll look, there's kind of a yellowy orange here and a darker orange here. I really prefer the darker orange. If you look, I was kind of trying it out over here on this paper. That really is very yellowy, and I don't think that's the right color, and this one's darker. If you love that yellowy color and you want to use it, then that's fine, but I think this darker orange is going to be better. So what we're going to do is paint our fox. So I'm going to get some water. They are called watercolors for a reason, right? You get some water on your brush, and then I'm going to get some of this darker orange, and I'm going to paint with it. Now we want our watercolors to be light. You don't want them to be really thick and scratchy. If your paint starts to get thick and scratchy, then that means you're not using enough water. Sometimes people think with watercolors, if you're not going to change colors, you don't need to go back for more water, but you do. Okay, so I'm filling in the face with my color. I'm using, when I get to the edges, the tippy tip of the brush, the pointy part. Like it's on its tiptoes like a ballerina, okay? And now what I'm gonna do is come back in and add just a little bit more color. I feel like that got maybe a little bit too light. So I'm just coming back in and adding a little bit more color. All right, and then I'm going to do my ears. And remember, the cheeks of the fox are gonna be white, so we're gonna leave those white. Okay, so the ears are done and the face is done. Now, while that's still wet, I'm not gonna get any more water, and I'm just gonna take and dab some of this dark orange on here. Now I'm gonna put in a shadow. So this is all really light, right? Because we use plenty of water. That's a light value. So we're gonna shade it with a dark value. And you wanna do this while it's still wet, because as you can see, look at how it blends beautifully as you go. You don't have to blend it. It just, the water grabs it and then pulls it out and blends it for you, okay? So now that that part is done, you have some light orange here and some dark orange around it. Now we can move on to the next section. So I'm gonna get some more water on my brush, and I'm gonna start painting the side or back body. That's the right word, the body of the fox. Once again, when you get up into these tiny points, pull your paintbrush up on its tippy toes, like a ballerina, so that you don't get into those white fuzzy cheeks, okay? I need a little bit more color and a little bit more water. Ooh, if it's too dark like that, then as you spread it, look, it gets lighter, doesn't it? Okay, I'm not gonna do the tail yet. I'm just gonna leave it, so I'm just kind of going right there to where the tail isn't. Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do the paw. And again, tippy toes right there around the edge. Put it on its tippy toes. Tippy toes, it's almost good to kind of like outline it on its tippy toes. And you should be noticing that this paint goes on really smooth because of the paper. Paper makes a huge difference. All right, now, just like I did on the head where I made that darker shadow, I'm gonna come back. I'm not gonna get any more water. There's already plenty of water in there anyway. And I'm gonna get some more orange. And I'm going to add it right here. And because it's still wet, it kind of sort of gets spread out. Now look right there where it wasn't as wet and it didn't get spread out. Watch, I'm just gonna come back and add a little bit of water to it along the edge. It should blend a little bit better. Okay, so now we're ready for the tail. I'm gonna paint the tail. That's a little dark, but remember we're gonna spread it out, so it'll be fine. Tippy toes to get around these little corners of the white. Tippy toes, tippy toes. The reason you want to do one section at a time is it just helps everything stay wet and do what you want it to do when you want it to do it. If it dries and you try to add the shadow, it doesn't look right. So now I'm going to come back and get some more of that orange. I'm going to do a shadow, say along the bottom here. And all that paint grabs it, and all that water grabs it and spreads it and blends it nicely. Okay. In the picture of my sample, you can see I have these little tiny lines for texture. We can't do those today because this part of our watercolor is still wet. And when we do that while it's wet, what it's gonna do is spread and turn into globs and not texture lines. So we don't wanna do that today. We're gonna save that and do that next week. What I am gonna have you do is start your foliage in the background. We're just gonna prep it so that it's ready for next week, okay? And what we're gonna do is I want you to think of your fox like a sun, right? And when you make a sun, let me show you. I'm gonna move this out of the way for a second. When you make a sun, I'm gonna use green since that's what we're gonna be using. When you make a sun, the lines from your sun, they don't go straight up and down like this the whole time, right? They go outwards. So what you would do is go out like this. That's called radial balance, radial, which means circular. Flowers have radial balance, the sun has radial balance, mandala drawings, there's all kinds of things that have radial balance, all right? And so we want our leaves to have radial balance around our fox. So you don't want it to just be all up and down. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use 2 colors of green today, and we're just gonna prep our stems, like painting stems of a flower, all right? And there's 2 colors we're gonna use today. We're gonna use this true green right here and this blue green, and we're gonna save this really bright green to do all of these little like foliage dabs to fill in between when we're done next week. It looks really good like that. So I'm gonna start with this true green, and I'm gonna get my paintbrush wet, and I'm gonna put it in there, okay? And I like to start right here in the corner of the foxes, where the ear and the body meet, and I just kind of do a line that curves out like this. I like to add a little curve to it. I'm not gonna make it straight, okay? And then I skip a little bit, because remember, we're gonna have a darker one here. So you want this one to go like right here. And we may as well fill our space. So go ahead and bring it all the way out as far as you can, okay? And notice how these 3 are close to the same, but then when I get here, I'm not gonna make it go up like this. I'm gonna make it come out like this. And so I'm starting to change directions as I go. And you don't have to go back and get new paint every time. You can make some curve like an S curve almost. I'm gonna leave this space for the dark blue one or the dark green one. I'm gonna do this one right here. You don't have to be perfect to be good. We're going to fill in between. In just a minute, I need some more water on my paintbrush. If for some reason you don't have time to do this today, you could always do it next week. Okay, so now I've got that done, and those are perfect. They're gonna be great for our leaves. So now let me start again and and go in between those. And I'm going to use this really dark blue-green right here. It's a really pretty color, just to give it some variety. So now I'm going to come through and do the same thing. That probably doesn't have enough paint. That's almost too light. And I'm just coming through and adding them back in. If they're closer together and you end up with some overlapping leaves next week, that's okay. If they're farther apart, that's okay too. It's all going to be okay, because in real life you would have overlapping leaves and you would have some that didn't touch at all, right? So it's going to make it look more realistic in the long run. So see how our fox is like the center of a foliage sun. That was our goal. Okay, so now that you're done with that, you're done for today. You need to write your name down here in the corner. You're gonna write it right here. And we're gonna put it in the drying rack. See how it's in Sharpie? And then you're gonna come back next week and do some more on it. All right, you guys, we're back for week 2. Your fox should look like a center of a foliage sun, right? That's what we talked about last week. That radial balance was something we talked about last week, which means that everything comes out from the center like a sun, right? We also talked about proportion, which means getting things the right sizes and the right shapes comparatively, like in the right place. And then we also talked about value, and we created a little bit of value by using our light watercolor and then adding a darker value in a few areas to give it a little bit of shading, okay? This week, we're gonna start with adding some texture. Texture is how something feels. And if you were to touch a fox, I never have, maybe some of you have, it would have a little bit of texture, right? Like furry. So we're gonna add some fur texture. But instead of covering our whole fox in texture, we're just gonna do a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of this red right here. I'm not gonna use this dark red up here next to the dark orange. I'm gonna use this red next to the light orange. And my red has some gunk around it, so I'm just gonna get right here out of the middle. The paint is really good right there. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit of water, and then I'm just using the tippy point of my paintbrush. And I'm even gonna wipe some of that back off because I got too much water when I was demonstrating, all right? And if you want to, you could take a piece of paper. You could ask Miss Caitlin or Miss Courtney or myself for a paper and just practice, okay? But what we wanna do is make these little marks like this, like little dashes. And I'm just using the tippy tip of my paintbrush. And some of them are wider and some of them are skinnier, and that's okay. They don't all have to be exactly the same. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start, now that I'm ready, I'm gonna start right here. And I'm gonna do some up the nose, up the center. You don't wanna fill the whole thing in. Have any of you ever done this with, I bet some of you have done it with like scales on a fish, or maybe even bricks, like in a castle or a house, where you draw a few scales or a few bricks, but you don't fill the whole thing in because that would take too long. So I'm just gonna do some texture up the middle. And then I'm gonna do some over here on the fox's back. And we just wanted to use that red because it's darker. You probably could have used the same orange that you used, just with less water so that it showed up. But I like it with this red. I'm not even gonna rinse my brush or get more paint. I'm just gonna use it and roll with it. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a little bit right here on the paw. All right, so we have the indication of the texture without having to fill it all in. I think it just adds a little something extra, okay? Now we're ready to start on these leaves, okay? And what I suggest you do is do all of each color at a time. So I'm gonna start with this true green right here, okay? This green right here, the true green. And I'm gonna start adding leaves. Now, on my sample, the leaves are kind of this pointed shape. And if you look, they're not all perfect. Like if you look at this one, it has like a little extra brush stroke to the side. It doesn't have to be perfect to be good. If you end up with a leaf that's less pointed, so let me show you, and you can practice on your practice paper. So let's say this is my stem, And let's say I end up with some rounded leaves. Mine are pointed. What if you made rounded leaves? Like little teardrop shapes that you filled in? Would that be okay? Yeah, that would be fine, okay? They don't have to be pointed. Mine are gonna be a little bit like this because that's how I make them. But you don't have to do it that way. And or if you're trying to do it this way and they end up this way, look at how nice this looks. That still looks really nice, okay? So it doesn't really matter how your leaves look as long as you make them the same way all across. So whatever way you start with, you wanna finish it that way, okay? So I'm gonna start with my leaves. And I'm gonna do one here and one here. You can make them at the same point or you could stagger them. So you could do like one here and then one up here. On this set, I'm gonna make them at the same place, and then I think on the next set I'm gonna stagger them. And then I'm gonna do up one at the very end like this. And then I'm gonna come up the middle again just to make it all kind of blended. All right? Now I know you don't wanna sit here and watch me do every single one of those. Okay, so now that I'm done with all of those, it's already looking really good, isn't it? You can see that some of these are probably going to overlap some of these, and that is okay. That would be how it is normally. You just roll with it, okay? So now I'm going to take the dark blue. I'm going to do the same thing. I think I'm going to do a more rounded one for these. You could do it exactly the same, whatever it is that you did for your leaves. On these, I did them exactly the same. These leaves, I did the same as these leaves, okay? But this one, I'm just gonna do them a little bit different, okay? And when they overlap, they overlap. So I'm gonna start where I started before, right here. And I'm gonna do rounded leaves on this one. Okay, now that you're done with that, I know that was a lot of handwork. I bet a lot of you have hands hurting. Well, look how cute it looks. Now we're gonna come back and fill in with this bright green. That's what we saved it for. And it's gonna mix, and it might mix with some of your leaves that you already have on there, but that's okay. So what you wanna do is up close to the fox and outwards, you're just gonna dab this bright green. Try not to get into your fox. And I just brought it out a little ways. I didn't bring it out all the way to the edge. And what it does, it just kind of fills in with more foliage and makes it look like your foliage is full. Okay, but I'm still leaving this white around the edge. All right, and now we're done. You have a fall fox in foliage. You can leave these in the drying rack and pick them up next week so that way they don't get messed up. Or if you're done in time and they have time to dry, you can take them home. That's up to you. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time with another tutorial.